Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for joining us today for our webinar on how banks can foster a culture of innovation. I'm grateful to the panelists for taking the time to share their views with us and Backbase for sponsoring this webinar. Now, when it comes to innovation, banks are often the punching bag, with a lot of pundits saying that they're dinosaurs, saying they're slow to innovate. And the reasons are always the same, right? Legacy systems, culture, or just plain complacence. But are these characterizations accurate, and what can banks do to foster a culture of innovation? Joining us today to discuss this topic, we have on top that Datuk Nora Manaf, who is the Chief Human Capital Officer for Maybank. Below Datuk Nora, we have Shailesh Grover, who is the Chief Digital and Innovation Officer for Hong Leong Bank. And below him, we have Riddhi Dutta, who is the Regional Head for ASEAN and South Asia at Backbase. And last but not least, we have Maimunah, who is the Managing Director for Wholesale Banking in AmBank Group. Now, we have a very good and diverse panel over here. One from HR, one from digital innovation, and one from wholesale banking. So should be quite an interesting discussion today. Maybe we can start by addressing that statement that banks are slow to innovate, right? And maybe we can have Datuk Nora to comment on this first. Do you agree that banks are slow to innovate? Do you think that statement is true?
Well, morning everybody. Assalamualaikum. I think my answer could be quite frustrating to you, Vincent. I would say it depends. It depends. Okay. Let me highlight on two things, and maybe I'll give the floor to the rest to contribute. But firstly, when I say depends, it's because we must understand where we are in time, right? Post the last economic crisis, 2008, I think there has been a lot of self-reflection within the banking fraternity, and with digitalization hitting us, non-traditional competitors and so forth, I think everybody's woken up. So I think that push is there. Okay. But the second point is you introduced me as HR. Yes, I represent a lot of the HR aspects, but I am a chartered accountant by training. I'm a chartered banker, and I've been in 4 other industries before joining banking. So the second response to your point would therefore come from that perspective. Even prior to the economic crisis that I highlighted. I was in semiconductor, I was with Intel, I was with telecommunications, right? Had partnerships with a US Baby Bell company, right? US West, British Telecoms and so on. So I've seen that side as well. And it's not consistently innovative in within the culture of the organization. It's predominantly driven by pockets. So you could be in a situation where you are in a sea of inertia, but you've got little islands of zest and energy. So that would be my comment, Vincent. I hope I've not detoured the conversation right at the very beginning.
Well, I like that term, a little zest of innovation, right? Thanks for the comment. Let's move on to Shailesh, who's probably that big zest or little zest within his own bank. And you yourself, you are in the innovation department, right? So I hope I'm not putting you in a spot by asking, are banks innovative, or do you think banks are dinosaurs?
To what Dato said, but it's a function. So slow and fast is a very relative term. It depends on how you look at it. And if I make a generic statement, yes, banks are slow. If I make a specific statement, then depends on what does that mean for a specific market, for a specific regulatory framework, environment, maturity of. It's not just the bank, right? It's a whole ecosystem that makes you do certain things. So if I look at Hong Leong, Singapore, for example, I can do a lot of things that I cannot do here. If I look at Vietnam, I cannot do a lot of things that I can do in Malaysia. So it's a function of all those, just coming back to the home turf. But if I go back to my generic statement I made, the reason I say they're slow is purely because the rate of adoption amongst the customer base is far faster. And I'm not talking about banking per se. In theory, everybody that uses a smartphone, which generally I would argue is 100%, give or take, is digital. So the onus is up to us. How do we make sure we use what that technology offers and lends itself to being able to deliver the right experience, so it doesn't feel like, oh my God, now I have to learn banking on a mobile phone. If it's easy enough, it should come as second nature. If there is friction, it's a problem.
Okay, thank you for that comment, Shailesh. Let's move on to Riddhi. And I hope I'm not putting you in trouble with your clients. Do you think banks are not innovative?
No, I think I agree with what Shailesh started off saying, that it's a very relative term, and when we are saying banks are slow, which industry are we comparing it to? Are we comparing it relatively with e-commerce? Probably yes, banks are slow. But if we compare it with other industries, I think generally banking is at par. But the other thing that we also need to understand, that even within the industry, again, Shailesh spoke about Hong Leong Singapore versus Hong Leong Malaysia. I think the regulatory framework, the size of the bank, the customer base would also decide how so-called fast or slow you are in terms of your innovation. We have heard about, I think we have heard about McKinsey's two-speed IT architecture, right? And I'm not going to talk about technology here, but if you look at that two-speed IT architecture which McKinsey spoke about back in 2013 or 2014, very simple thing, right? You have your legacy systems at the bottom, and you have the new age, innovative digital systems at the top. Now, for way too long, the banks have been focusing on transformation of the legacy systems, which takes its own period of time. It's not going to happen overnight, at the cost of ignoring the top layer, which is the digital customer facing channels. Now, if you really start focusing on those customer facing channels, internal employee facing channels, probably your speed of innovation could be faster, while you let your legacy run in the slow pace that it is supposed to run, without really pushing it to sort of change overnight. So just to summarize, I think the speed of innovation or the pace of innovation is a relative term, first of all. Second of all, within the industry itself, again, depending on the context of the bank, the regulatory framework, it will differ. And then more from a technology perspective, where are you focusing on? Are you focusing on customer experience, or are you focusing on legacy modernization? Is also going to play a large factor in deciding how slow or fast you are in terms of innovation.
Everybody sounds like Albert Einstein now. Everything's relative. let's, let's move on to Rajate. Rajate, what are your comments on this statement over here?
Well, historically, banks were actually, if I may say, the center of innovation. You remember the whole ATM machine? So we were that. We innovated and we did all the stuff. Today, when you ask, are we slow? That's because you're comparing us to the fintechs. You're comparing us to the other people who are introducing banking products in a different way. And they're able to do things differently. So that's why you're asking this question. Why are we not responding as quickly? So on that end, yes, I would say that not that we're slow to innovate. I don't think it's an innovation thing. I don't think it's a technology thing. A lot of banks, and I can speak about perhaps all my colleagues here, it is largely the shift in mindset also. And it's just the way we've been doing things. And today, banks in Malaysia in particular, if you look at our P&L, we're not that hungry, or we're not pushed to a corner where we feel that we need to innovate. We don't feel that anyone's really moved our cheese. So, okay, there are fintechs nibbling here and there, remittances, maybe some in the payment space here and there. But, they seem to provide a greater CX than we do. But there's no real one of these guys who can come in and step into the shoes of the big banks you have here at home, here in Malaysia at least, or anywhere in the world. So the frustration from someone like Vincent, who's a user, so his question is that why are you guys not, why is your mobile app not like, I don't know, one of those fancy kind of Grab stuff? Why is your mobile app still not like that? So we have the technology, we have the will to innovate, but that may not necessarily translate to the entire organization. And of course, the agility of our core banking system is another point that may hinder us from being able to, just produce new things every 2 weeks like these guys, right? I don't know about Shailesh, but I get a window maybe 2 to 3 times a year before my CIO allows me to go and tweak here and tweak there. So that's pretty much it.
Yeah, thank you for that. So the theme that I'm kind of seeing emerging from the comments from all the speakers is that, one is all relative, and two is all about how to have that cultural shift, right? So maybe we'll try to address that first common theme that's brought up, the fact that it's relative. So obviously, a fintech startup would find it easier to come up with innovative ideas because by nature, startups are disruptive, right? And often the mantra for startups is, move fast and break things. And that might not work for banks because if you move fast and break things, it could be a bit problematic. So it does seem that the nature of banks being conservative, the nature of banks and financial services being risk averse seems to be counterintuitive against the whole idea of innovation. So how do banks kind of try to reconcile that? And maybe I can direct the question to the Chief Innovation Officer in the house. Shailesh, what is your thoughts on that?
So I think, when you say disrupt or destroy, it's not, in my view, those are buzzwords that sell a magazine or make you popular in a conference. It's not about that. It's about challenging the status quo, right? And it's very easy when you have nothing. You have no customers, you have nothing, you have a brilliant idea, and you have a whiteboard. It's very easy to come up with stuff, and it's very easy to build a prototype and then say, well, it'll be cool if we can. It's very hard, or it's a different challenge to do the same thing when you have a flight in the air and you're trying to replace the wings of the aircraft. You have passengers on the flight, and it's going at a certain speed. There is no parking it and then doing what you want to do. It's midair. So that's like the general comparison between someone, a startup which has seed funding versus a bank which has a whole lot of other things to deal with. So it's how do you then change the mindset of the people within the organization to be able to challenge the status quo, to be able to take calculated risks and do things differently. Right. In some cases, it will cannibalize your steady stream of revenue. In other cases, it will create newer revenue streams. So you have to recognize all those things and then take it into account before you do anything. Is it possible? Yes, I've done that in a telco, which was a beast. I'm talking about the AT&T, the new AT&T. I've seen that and been part of the journey in Barclays. It's not easy. It's like turning an elephant to turn the other way. Because Barclays, for example, was a 325-year-old beast when I was there. To change that, to look the other way, it's going to take time. But it doesn't mean you can't. So, even in Hong Leong, right, we've been on a journey for a while. And when I joined in 2018, I'll give one example. We picked on one specific problem around credit cards. We said, to onboard a customer to get a credit card, it's actually quite an onerous journey because of this, because of that, because compliance says all the different people that have to, that are there for a reason to keep you honest. You could argue on the other side, there's friction in the journey. But then we looked at it differently. We said, how do we treat our existing to bank customers or existing to card customers? It turned out that we treat them the same way, as if you're a brand new customer coming to get a Hong Leong credit card. So we deliberated, we got various people, audit, security, compliance, credit, all those guys in a room. And we said, let's try to challenge how we onboard an existing to card customer. So from filling 25 fields to going 20 clicks and somebody calling you and this and that, all then wet signal, we got it down to 3 clicks, no questions asked. The first click was you select the card. The second click was you basically confirm your email ID. And the third click was you saying, I want the card delivered to this address. That's it. And I will give you a digital card on the fly on the screen. So it is possible, but it's how you attack the problem, how you challenge practical historical beliefs that have been in place for a long time for the right reason. They served its purpose at a point in time when they were established. Things have evolved, tech has evolved, regulation has evolved. So now you need to account for all those things and say, what can I do different? So it's not about destroying or, I mean, those are okay terms to use for a conversation, but it's about challenging the status quo is my view.
Well, I mean, as a magazine, that's a nice term to push in headlines, right? So I guess, one follow-up question that probably I might want to direct to Datuk Nora, because we spoke a lot about culture and how to create that kind of culture. And I think culture is a big part of what the role of human resource and human capital is, right? And there are questions from the audience asking about how do we actually bring that mindset shift? How do we accelerate innovation? And I'm directing it to Datuk Nora, but of course, the rest of the panelists are welcome to chime in. I'm sure everyone has views on this as well. But maybe we can have Datuk Nora to speak on this. But how do you bring about that kind of mindset shift, especially when the organization employs several thousand people, right? It's easy to change the mindset of 5 people, but if you have 5,000 people, that's a whole different ballgame. So how do you go about that in Maybank, Datuk Nora?
You mean 43,000 people?
43,000, yeah. I mean, 5,000 is just a hypothetical
I'm
number,
kidding.
but of course, Maybank is way bigger than that.
I'm just pulling your leg. Well, when the challenges are seemingly insurmountable, yeah, I mean, if it were that simple, it would have been done immediately. So it's just a lot to be done. Okay, hence for me, right, and what we've been able to do is to focus on ensuring that the leaders, because culture is a big word, and people like to throw culture under the bus for every issue and every pain, right? And for me, it's the environment that you create. And Gallup, all the good research tells you that the manager or the number one or the top or the leader, supervisor, if it's right down in the organization, you can create the culture. You can influence the environment, and you must, right? It is necessary today. So what we've used is that, really, right? Make sure you have the right leader, make sure you have the right person, so that person then takes ownership to clear the path for anything that needs to be done, right? And what we've discovered is by doing that, right, initially in pockets, it just grows, right? People look at on the other side of the floor and say, why are they having so much fun? Why are they being recognized? How is it that they can do it, right? And then it just catches on, right? And we know we are connected, right? Our COVID's just reminded us. It's not it's not that COVID's created a situation where humans are connected. We have been connected, and that's not been utilized well enough. So to your question, it can be done. Don't throw culture under the bus. You can create an environment. You can ring fence if you have to, right? And just drive it, and then it catches on. And we really need to look at this right now. But I'd like to quickly weigh in on the earlier point and expand on it a little as well. When we talk about innovation in banks, I think it's important for us to understand that yes, it will be a situation where we are slow and arrogant, if you like, right? If we do not quickly resolve pain that the customers have, right? So again, right, without having to come up with a major, transformation plan, what you do is focus on the pain points and that's, and solve it. That to me is innovation. And that's something that we all need to do today. Include, because the fact that we have to create new roles, and I'm going to push this because it's well and good to say less footfall and let's close brick and mortar. I'm not going to chicken out and say, okay, I'll get my bonus, right? Because if I cut 10,000 headcount, everybody's going to pat my back, right? Investors, analysts is going to say good job, right? But there are 10,000 people on the street, so no way, Jose, right? That's old. That's an old solution. Been there, done that, right? So that needs innovation today as well.
So it sounds
Thanks.
like a lot of reskilling and a lot of other aspects to consider when you move on to a lot of these new things, right? Okay, let's move on to the other panelists. Does anyone else want to chime in on this topic of how do you actually drive that kind of culture internally? I almost say eternally, which I guess is not a bad thing, but internally is what I meant to say. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
think it had to start top, at least from the experience I had over the last 10 years. And that was from the board, at the board level, because most of the people who sit on the board, collectively, they're about 500 years old, I think. So that made it kind of challenging. When the journey started for me 10 years ago, some of them weren't even using smartphones. So you can imagine is that kind of mind shift that we needed to address. So what I've pretty much done was brought in people who were clearly movers in this industry. Like I actually have this what we call technology day. We've done this for over 10 years now, in AmBank for 4 years now, where we bring speakers from Ping An or the Grab guy, or just sharing with our board members about the world out there, how things are being done differently. Because honestly, some of them, because they're not users. So when you're not users, you don't quite get what this whole disruption thing that people are talking about. So that has helped. And then you move from there down to the C-suites as well, because everyone's running at 100 miles an hour, trying to run their business. And nothing, if it's not broken, why are you trying to fix something that ain't broken? Especially if it's still yielding good results, in terms of dollars and cents. So why do you want to do something else? I think Shailesh mentioned this. Some lines of businesses are worried that if we were to introduce new stuff, that we could be cannibalizing our own businesses, or we could actually be isolating our existing clients who've been doing things a certain way. So the next round was also to get the buy-in of all the C-suites. So the culture change, and I think Datuk Nora said it really, it has to come from the top. But the top may not be the one to lead the change if the top themselves are not quite aware of what change they need to lead. So within the pockets of organization, there'll be people like, Shailesh, and I would like to, so a few of us where I am, it is our job then to also to educate upwards. So for me, the education is upwards. Okay, so maybe like for Maybank, half the battle is won because the CHCO is already like, look, I'm going to get in new, roles. That may not necessarily be the case for the rest of us, right? We may not have the foresight by people above my pay grade, for instance, to see why we should create these existing roles. We're already making this amount of money. Why do you want to create this whole bunch of other people to do what? So one of the things that I've actually tried to reiterate is that some of this is actually a defensive move, that if you do not change, you will actually become irrelevant and you will lose some of your very profitable business to the non-FIs, to the fintechs. Case in point, remittances, payments, because the fintechs do not really want to do mortgage, nor do they want to do HP. Those are the less profitable business, very capital intensive. They don't want. You know what, you banks, you can keep those. They want the capital light business where profitability is higher. So a lot of what we do today, is hygiene. We have to do it because otherwise you just wake up one day and you would have lost this. All of us, Maybank, Leong, AmBank, and all the rest. If you look at your inventory of retail customers, they don't reflect the population demographics. They don't. So we have 65% of millennials, but not all millennials are banking. They're putting money in their wallets. They're doing things outside. The younger they are, the Gen Z, they may not necessarily ever really use a bank. And I can say that, my daughters don't really, they don't bank with high street banks in the UK. They bank with the Monzos of the world. So some of it is a defensive move, at least particularly on the retail side. So it's a little bit the change in mindset, a bit of putting the fear in God, and that's how you get upwards to buy. You need the buy-in from upwards because you need them to give you money, and you need them to give you blessings for you to make changes within the organization. Once at the top is bought in, and then it flows down. I mean, a bank is not a democratic institution. There's no democracy. So if the decision comes from the apex, it will flow down.
A lot of very salient points there, and I'm sure both Shailesh and Riddhi has something to add. But before we go there, I just wanted to quickly follow up on one comment, right? So I think earlier you mentioned that one of the reasons why banks don't innovate is because, nobody's really moving their cheese, but like you brought up examples of Monzo, and as we know, Bank Negara is closing the deadline for the digital bank just this month. And we hear from our friends RHB and Axiata, who's going to be making an announcement after this session about their possible consortium. So somebody is coming in to move the cheese, right? So do you think that's the case? Or do you think banks are still safe, like the cheese is still there?
If I may say, I still think not every part of the business would be easily shaken by those new, the flurry of the cheese movers. If you ask me, the big corporate businesses, the big wholesale businesses that I run, because my business is so diverse. I have SMEs right down to the big corporates. It's not going to change for the big corporates, the guys who run billion-dollar type of businesses who use our investment banking products. I don't think so. But if you're talking about the middle market, SMEs down to retail, I think that is where that the real danger of you losing that space to these guys, because they do things on the cheap, they do things quickly, and these digital banks generally around the world, their focus is CX, is all about CX, whereas we banks have always created products first and then we sell them. They don't. They create an experience. So that is the real distinction, which I think retail, smaller SMEs would appreciate. Not so much the big corporate guys, because you have RMs for each of these big corporate guys. So that's not the space they will be in.
So your bonus is still safe for the foreseeable decade, huh?
For my big wholesale business, yes, but I don't think the middle market is safe.
I kid, anyways. So Shailesh, you wanted to add something as well?
Oh, I think on the cultural piece, the way I see, driving some of the changes that, for example, we are trying to do within Hong Leong Bank. It's it's a combination of a few things, and my fellow panelists have mentioned a few already. But in my mind, the first one is creating an environment, and that's a combination of infrastructure, which could be physical space, things like that, making it a fun environment. The other is tools, which is the digital tools that are required to collaborate, to do various activities that lend themselves to creating the right experiences. Even things like design thinking, one is we talk about design thinking, agile, all those things, and confuse the heck out of the workforce. The other is you show how it's done. You bring the right tool at the right point in time without branding it A or B or C. And then people practice it and they realize it's actually not a big deal. You can actually make it happen. So by doing is the right way, in my view, where you can, start small and then, scale the infectious nature of those kind of tools across the organization. The other thing we do quite regularly for every single journey, whether it's the wholesale business or the retail business or Islamic, whatever it is customer immersion sessions. So we don't start anything without starting with the customer. And I'm not saying starting with the customer for the sake of this discussion. We talk to real customers. We talk to customers. We look at how and this is not just Hong Leong customers. This is prospects who may be Maybank customers, AmBank, anybody that could be a potential customer, just to get a sense of what the day in the life of, how would they interact with, an idea we have, how would they react to an experience that we created before we roll it out and put it in real production environments, right? So there are multiple iterations that we do before, and it sometimes takes longer than we want, but it's worth the time spent, because when we do go live, we've started to ask ourselves less and less, why are people not using it? Earlier it was we launch it and then we say, oh my God, it was a great idea. Why is it not being used? So it's getting lesser and lesser. We still have ways to go. The third one we do is exposing staff to the external world, which happens in various ways. Whether you call it hackathon, Launchpad, the accelerator that we have, Datathon, or it's to create a mindset change of the art of the possible. We don't expect everybody to become tech geeks and hackers, and not that, but it's to expose them to, well, these kids are sitting in their bedrooms and creating stuff which we've been talking about for dog years. Granted, it's a prototype, but it's better than what most of the, some of them might have done internally, but create PowerPoint decks which look fancy. So that also changes or makes them believe things differently. And the last one is empowerment, right? But all these things require buy-in. I think one of the panelists mentioned that. And then how do you make sure that it becomes infectious and it becomes a sought-after thing? So we pick one thing that has done well, and we amplify the celebrations across the patch. So people, see that, okay, there is not just buy-in and the tone from the top, but there is an actual recognition when things actually go. It could be a failure, and failure is a negative term, but it's an experiment. We had a hypothesis, we spent some money, we built a prototype, it didn't go so well. That's okay. What are the learnings? How can we apply some of those learnings on the next thing? We need to celebrate those too. Because if we do those kind of things, then that actually sends the right message top to bottom and sideways, to say that the organization is serious. It's not just a flavor of the month or the year. It is actually something they believe in, and they put the money where the mouth is.
Thank you, Shailesh. And before I move on to Riddhi, just to quickly follow up on the initiatives you were doing, right? Because you're saying like, oh, these kids are building really interesting things out there, and it's taking you dog years to even try some of these things. So one of the vehicles that I've seen you guys do is through your Launchpad, right? So what are some measurable outcomes that you've seen in Hong Leong Bank in terms of its contribution to your own innovation within the bank from that initiative?
So we've got about 20 startups that have come over the years from the Launchpad that are currently actively working with us. And in some instances, about half of them have their products integrated with ours and delivering services to our customers. Some on the individual customer space and others on wholesale. So there are but we don't start like that. We don't say, if you don't have this outcome, we will cannibalize the Launchpad program. That's not the thing, because in some case we don't know what we might get. So you can't do it as a traditional. You need to have a business plan, then you need to do this. Only then you will get the change to go wrong. In some instances, it's a leap of faith. In other instances, there's a calculated risk we take. But if you really ask about, there are about 20 odd startups that have been identified from the Launchpad programs over the years that we're currently actively working with.
All right. Thank you for clarifying that. So let's move on to Riddhi. Riddhi, I'm sure you have some comments uh, uh, about the earlier question, which was quite some time back after quite a few answers. Basically, talking about how to create innovation culture within banks. Right? What if you observe with your clients? Several other teams that came up as well, talking about whether or not banks are at risk with cheese movers, as Rajate would put it, right? Or Richard in the group here saying, has the asteroid landed yet? Can banks evolve in time? So there are several themes that I think would be interesting for you to address. Really, you have the floor. Please feel free. Go ahead.
Thanks. No, so as you mentioned, Victor, very good comments that came out earlier. I won't probably talk a lot about the culture because Shailesh, Rajate, and uh, Nora are probably more versed with that. What I'm going to talk about is the process side of things, and I think Rajate spoke about and let's say a Monzo doing better in terms of CX compared to a traditional bank because traditional banks are focusing more on products. And I'm just going to give one example of a bank in Asia without naming them. When we were talking to them sometime last year, they were saying, on the consumer lending journey, for example, we have a fully digital process and we don't need to do anything. So we are fine with that. But we wanted to ask them a few more questions and we wanted to sort of deconstruct the entire consumer lending journey, starting from the digital channels, going down to the branch, the contact center, as well as the back office. And when we started doing that, we realized, and I'll give you a few data points, and might be interesting. We realized that on an average per branch, in 1 year, there are 4,500 visits that customers are still doing, where they are going in and saying, "Hey, I want to submit this document, which needs to be uploaded into your system," despite the bank saying, "I have a digital system for consumer lending." There are 13,200 calls that the contact center is getting per year just to check on the status of where is my loan application, right? And then there are, I think, around 2,400 or 2,500 odd tasks that one contact center employee is getting every year, where they just have to take the documents and convert them into PDFs before they are uploaded. Very, very tactical and minor things, and these numbers might not make a lot of sense. But when we took all these numbers and we started putting up the cost per request or the cost per this visit. So for this bank, I think they were looking at from a contact center perspective $2 or $3 per request. From a back office perspective, a slightly higher number per request, and it all added up. And finally, what we saw is that from one journey, despite the bank claiming that we have a digital process for it, a journey like consumer lending, the bank was looking at a saving of at least $100,000 per year just for one journey by improving in terms of the process that they have. And then you start stacking up all the different journeys that we're talking about. I think Shailesh was talking about credit card journey as one of them, right? And finally, we presented a business case to the bank which says that, hey, if you're really looking at a true digital offering, which is front to back, not just related to what the customers are doing, but automated all the way down to your back office, your contact center, you're probably looking at a saving of around $3 to $4 million over a 5-year period. That's not the point here. The point that I'm trying to make here is banks, obviously, when they're starting on a digital journey, when they're starting on trying to compete with the fintechs, culture is important, but relooking at your processes are very important. Quite often we hear banks coming to us and saying, "Hey, I want a new mobile app." Okay, what do you want? I want ASIS to be replaced with another ASIS in a different shape and form. That's not what you do in digital. I mean, if you try to do that, you'll spend a few $1,000,000, but I think Shailesh was talking about it, right? When you go back to your customers, you look at your feedback, it's still pretty much the same. You have not really innovated. So if you are willing to sort of relook at your processes all the way front to back, and let partners like us come in and start questioning you. And there are banks who are more open to it, saying, "Please question us. We are happy to relook at our processes." And then there are banks who are saying, "No, we know it all." I think that's a very important cultural shift that needs to happen. That yes, you know a lot, but then there are others who are probably doing things better than you. Can you learn from them? We, as somebody who's working with so many different types of banks, starting from small credit unions in the US to large banks in Europe and Asia, we are getting exposed to a lot of these nuances, trying to bring them to our prospects and customers. So along with culture, if you tie in the process bit, I think then that is where it becomes really, really tangible when you're talking about a true innovation. That's all I just wanted to add, Vincent.
Thank you, Riddhi. And I think one thing that I really do enjoy about this panel is that everybody's coming from a different perspective. You have someone from the tech perspective, someone talking about culture, someone talking about more tactical things. So it really gives us a very whole view of how we can approach this subject, right? And I think at the core of every bank or at any organization is really looking at talent. And with a lot of these startups now, kind of attracting the tech minds, the financial minds with attractive packages, cool offices, which may not be as relevant this year. But I guess how do banks work on attracting talent? And I probably would like to direct that question to Datuk Nora, who's in the human capital team, right? So how does Maybank go about attracting the right talent? Number one. And number two, when they do get on board, of course, how do you design your compensation and benefits package for them to stay and to design it in such a way to encourage them to take risks, be more innovative and whatnot? Dr. Nora, you have the floor.
Well, thanks, Vincent. I think it's not rocket science. It's doing what we already know. The problem with humans is we know, but we don't do, right? Knowing doesn't mean doing. So what we've been actively doing for a few years now, not just today, right, is actually to truly believe and execute on diversity and inclusivity, right? To us, diversity and inclusivity is not just a buzzword because everybody is already, and good. Everybody's on board on sustainability and so forth, right? It's not a trendy word for us, right? For me, especially from a group human capital standpoint, and I'm accountable, of course, with my colleagues, but I have to take the lead as far as people policies and processes and tools are concerned and solutions. So we have been allowing diversity in all aspects, whether it is preference in terms of how you work, where you work, right through to the hours that you want to put in or not, okay? And then, of course, right, a package is negotiated based on that. So, for example, we've got, even before COVID, right, we've already got about close to 20% of our population on flex work arrangements. And when you're on flex work arrangements, to your question on comp, of course, your packages are also flexed, right? And then post-COVID, right, November last year, November 2020, we officially rolled out our work from home population, and they categorize mobile. We've got now over 3,000 who's officially already permanently work from home as their mobile workforce. No change in that package though. Okay. So the short answer is we truly include, so inclusivity, right? So that we do not lose the talents that we want. It is a lesson, of course. We always knew that. I don't want to sound arrogant, but I've always been a supporter of this, because back in 2005, when I was based in London, I had work from home arrangements. So work from home is something very normal to me, right? Whilst the majority are afraid and suspicious of it, right? So, we've been able to. So the silver lining of COVID-19, as I think most people would recognize, is the acceleration, right, of digitalization and digitalized behavior, if you like. And it has really helped us be able to truly push forward our flexible workforce and our flex comp, right? If I may, right, I also want to also highlight the fact that many of what we talk about, and the challenges in organizations is actually the product or byproduct of management tools and processes, right? And policies, principles, mindsets, right? Behind the policies that we've known have been outdated for at least 3 decades now, right? But knowing again doesn't mean doing, right? So you know, the fact that we talk about cannibalization, for example, right? If you link it back, right, it's because of silo mentality, or right? Silo mentality is a byproduct of org structures, which we know causes a lot of issues, right? From productivity issues to again silo mentalities, right? But also the balance scorecard or the KPIs that are also outdated, or at least needs to be repackaged, okay? Because cannibalization is also talked about because of KPIs, right? Because I trade off with Shailesh, or maybe I know, trade off is when it's willing, right? When I'm unwilling, then you call it cannibalize, right? when Shailesh's business, and yeah, we're in the same organization, right? But we use the word cannibalization because moving the traffic from me to Shailesh, what the heck, right? It actually benefits the organization. So my point is, relook, you know, what we are using, because those are the root causes. Okay. And finally, before I leave the floor, if you like, I just want to make sure that people understand, right? Because you mentioned the digital licenses and so forth. We are already a digital bank, Maybank, right? We've got what, 56 million traffic on our digital banking platform on a monthly basis, and that's about 2 million per day, right? And 7.5 million of our customers are on our digital banking platform, right? So, you know, we are definitely, right, not as you know, I worry when you say, you know, if nobody's moved our cheese. Definitely, I'm not one of those. So please count me out. Okay. I am on crisis mode. We've been on crisis mode at least for the last 7 years, I think. Okay. So definitely acknowledge that we may wake up tomorrow and be Kodak, if you like. Okay. Thanks, Vincent.
So, Dr. Nora, you are defender or guardian of the cheese, yeah? Keeping a close eye on that cheese. I think you brought up some good points, right? So from designing the management tools to make sure everything is aligned, to designing the common band and the packages to match the new workforce of the day, right? Because it's not like those days where the key thing is just a high package and a nice corner office. Everybody's got different priorities, and having that kind of arrangement could appeal to a wider audience of talent. Now, of course, this is, I'm sure everyone has some views on it. So maybe before I move on to the next question, if anyone has anything to add about attracting the right kind of talent to your organization or your team, please feel free to unmute your mic, and then I'll bring you up to the floor.
So
Shailesh?
to add to what Dato said, right? So I'm not going to repeat some of the things she mentioned because I think they were all spot on. But just to add to that, there are a couple of things that we are trying to do different, because the kind of talent that you need is now a blend between banking experience and completely non-banking. So, for example, majority of my team is are people that are from a psychology background, which has nothing to do with banking, you could argue. They come from startups, fintechs, or big techs. It's a mixed bag. Some are from Unilever. So, and there's a reason why. It's not to suggest that banking experience is not important, but you need some different thinking. You need a different set of eyes. Because otherwise we just keep doing the same thing differently. And that's not good enough, right? So having said that, the challenge that we now face is banks are not a sexy place for this type of people to come in. If you talk about designers, if you talk about experienced folks, they don't want to work for a bank because banks have, a perception of, what everything that we said, during the discussion today. They are slow. There's a perception of that. Doesn't mean everybody is like that. But that gives you the added challenge. Now, how do you attract, given the constraints, given the perception, given whatever else that comes in the way of you getting the right talent? And I say right with a grain of salt, getting the talent to come to Hong Leong Bank or any bank for that matter. So, we also had to change how we started engaging some of these guys. So once they come in, then we know that they will see and they will believe and they will be okay. Right? Now, and not everybody will last, because you need an element of perseverance and patience to write it out, at least for the first 6 months in a bank, if you don't understand the banking culture, right? And it's not that people are intentionally saying you cannot, but you could assume that there are more people paid in the bank to tell you why you cannot do stuff, as opposed to how you can make it happen, right? So, and there are plenty of day to day. I deal with a lot of people that will come and tell me cannot do because there's an audit finding, cannot do this because there's a compliance requirement. And the moment I pick up the phone and call the chief audit guy, he goes, the finding is something else. You don't need to do this. But there's a habit of being overly cautious. So how do you change that to retain who is already in the door as talent? That's one. Second is, how do you make sure that you attract the newer ones, which was the specific question. So we started to do a couple of years ago, we actually did the hackathon to do a couple of things. One, to expose staff to external ways of doing things or newer ways of. The other was it was a brilliant place to identify talent. Because normally we would go through competency, which is classic in every corporation, right? You have competencies, you have this, you have a job spec, you go through the process and then you say, sorry, or okay, great, you've qualified. But when the guy or the person comes in, you find out that the thought process is different, cannot thrive in an environment that we have. All those things then you uncover in the first 3 months. But if you're observing somebody that's in a stressful 24 hours trying to create something to address a problem, to win an, that already tells you a lot about the person, about the person's personality, about the person's temperament, about the person's ability to deal with ambiguity, and the fact that he's trying to solve a bank problem. So we looked at those kind of things. We also have other programs, which I'm sure others have too, which is the Management Associate Program, graduate trainee all those are to get young talent and to take them along the journey and groom them to be successful leaders in the near future. But those are some of the things. There's internship, a whole bunch of other things that we do.
I'm sure. And I guess, your approach of using your Launchpad as a way to identify talent is not a bad one, right? Because sometimes in interviews, we humans, we have our biases, right? It's like, oh, okay, you like this football club, I like this football club, we are best friends now. You feel more inclined to want this person on your team.
Yeah.
And I guess the best show of characters after 5 Red Bulls and 6 pizzas and 24 hours of no sleep, that's when true human nature comes out, right?
All right.
Yeah, so that's thank you for sharing some of your initiatives. Now, before I move on, Riddhi, Rajate, do you guys want to comment on the topic of talent, or shall we move along to the next one? No? Okay, good. So one theme that also has emerged from our conversation is innovation from the top, how to get the buy-in from the top management. And it is a challenge sometimes. Like, particularly one example that Rajat had brought up is that they don't really have exposure to these kind of things, right? And you sometimes have to bring in some of these external parties like Grab, Ping An to kind of share with them. And in a way, these people don't really interact with the banks that the same way that common folks do, right? Because these are high net worth individuals and the services they receive is drastically different. So my question is, how can innovators within a bank push for buy-in from the top management, particularly in an organization who may be a bit more conservative? Now, I open this to the floor. Whoever would like to go first, feel free to unmute your mic, and I'll bring you up on stage. Rajate, yes, go ahead.
Well, just to kind of repeat myself, I did say that my approach to the decision makers, which largely would be, one is a defensive move, and the defensive move the defensive move tagline is a little bit of putting fear a little bit in the minds of the shareholders and stakeholders, and also showing them bits and pieces of successes. So what we've done is that, you can't go and quite ask the guy to spend the amount of money that, say, Ping An spends on IT. I don't know, $5 billion or something like that, right? So what we do is, because we have internal sandboxes, we have pilot programs, and like Shailesh was saying, customer immersion programs. So bite sizes, and then you show them the results of these bite-size projects. And I give you a very good example, at least with AmBank, when I wanted to push for the open banking. We spoke about this. It was a real huge concern by a lot of people who probably didn't quite understand that. They thought that, once you expose your APIs means that, you're trading on confidentiality, trading on all those things that they worry about. So like I said, bite sizes. So we had a very good first customer, and we had proven that, within that ambit of permissibility, what Bank Negara allows us to do. And again, on this point, Bank Negara actually has got guidelines with regards to APIs. It's not that you cannot share them. You can within, what is allowed. And I actually quite like it. It's not so prescriptive. So we did it. So what we did with our very first pilot customer, Rakuten, in my view, is really one of those milestones that really broke the mold of people's worry and people's thinking, right? So our offer, when we first exposed our APIs to Rakuten, and to this day, we are still the only bank that's actually openly sharing our APIs, was for KYC purposes. And that was something that Bank Negara liked, right? Because, you're validating all these perhaps gray areas of KYC. And of course, the next stage was to expose APIs for payments. So we now have payment APIs. What I could show my board was that the resultant from a P&L perspective of doing that, and they were like, "Oh, really? Wow, that's quite a acquisition, because Rakuten was never my customer. Zero interaction, zero business. From that to, because my competitors are here, so I won't say it, but the returns on that was, for every dollar that we put in, the returns were so much more than our usual capital intensive kind of business, you know what I mean? And with that, I got then the next blessing to go ahead and do payment APIs. And then the next blessing to do this, like I said, now we are the sole settlement bank for PayNet for all TPAs. Again, that was it. I don't think with this wanting of technology, because technology is out there, you can buy. There's people at Riddhi, right, that can build stuff for us. So I don't think it's technology. It is really this, the need to kind of push them and say this is safe, because at the end of the day, the business of the bank is about trust. The moment we break that, there is no coming back. So that is where a lot of people need to kind of appreciate that sometimes we're slow, not because we choose to be slow, but because we're just so careful, because we cannot rebuild trust once it's broken, right? So those are one of the ways of doing that. Anybody in the audience is thinking about it, you build your own internal sandboxes, you do pilot projects, so that if you fail, like Shailesh said, you fail fast, and you're not dragging the whole institution with you, and it's not a whole lot of money that goes with it. For banks, you make billions of bucks, losing 1 million or 2 is not going to hurt you, right? But if you don't do it and you don't test these things, it could hurt you more, which is what we're telling our board members. So out of 10 things that you try, maybe 1 or 2 things can work, but the things that can work will garner you greater returns.
Thank you for that, Roger. And I think that the key here is doing it in bite size and getting them hooked, right? So that's a good approach to look at. Riddhi, would you like to comment? Because I feel like your entire sales team's whole job is to get buy-in, right? So how do you get buy-ins from some of these banks?
So the way we normally approach this is, it's very important to have or identify your champion within the bank. People who share the same sort of vision that you're trying to sell, and it's very important to identify those people upfront. And it is those people who can really push this internally. But again, I think there are different ways and means of trying to push this. One is, as Rajata mentioned, you actually show results. You start off. She took the Rakuten example. It's a very interesting one that she spoke about, right? You start off with let's say one API. You show the results coming in from there, and then let's go to the other one, which is a larger one around payments. So that is one way. The other way is where these champions really help you or enable you and put you in front of the larger stakeholders and say, listen, I am convinced, but I need you guys to come in and convince the rest of the guys that this is what is in the greater good for the bank. And that is what happens more and more where we are involved as technology vendors, where we have our champions, we have our people who are convinced about the story, the platform story that we sell. But then when it comes to convincing the larger board or the larger stakeholders, they put us in front of them and sort of do a joint pitch, so that it's a pitch coming from the champion and it is backed by somebody who is going to deliver it for them. But there's one thing which I wanted to say, and this is bang on, despite me representing a technology company. I always believe that technology is always an enabler. Technology can never be the reason why you want to change things. It's if you go back to the example that I spoke about earlier, it's the process and the culture, which really needs to be redefined, not defined, but redefined. And technology will always supplement it, and that's where people like us come in to supplement or complement those processes. But yeah, there are different ways and means of how you can really push this through. But from an outsider perspective, we normally, that identification of the champion, and I think in people like Shailesh or Rajate or Dutta, Nora, these are true champions because these are people who know what it's required. And we make people like these as our faces when we are trying to push this through internally within a bank.
All right, thank you for sharing your views. Before we move on to some final thoughts, Shailesh, Datuk, Nora, would you guys like to comment on getting buy-in from the top?
Okay, so
Yes, go ahead.
me make a quick comment.
Sure.
At least in Hong Leong, I don't have to worry about that because if you think I'm aggressive, Dominic Fuda is even more. So that actually helps a lot because I know at all times that I've got the air cover if I need it. Luckily, I've never had to use that as a trump card because, like I said, he's been more aggressive even before I joined. But then one is you get the push from the top. And that's not the only thing you need. Because how do you make sure you mobilize whatever needs to happen on the ground level? Just having the message from the top is not going to get you much far. So you need to have a combination of, well, yes, you've got the buy-in, you've got the air cover, but then you need to have everything else that we've been talking about in the last 60 minutes on what are the different elements, whether it's environment, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's tools, whether it's various programs, whether it's showing people how it can be done, whether it's getting people exposed. All those things need to work as Lego blocks to get you to a stage which aligns with whatever the top-down message was. Otherwise, it will not work. And the same thing, I talked about the credit card as an example. There are a dime a dozen other examples that I can cite, but it's not about. We did the same thing in Backbase. We started what we called at that time ICE, which was the entity we founded. It was called Innovation and Customer Experience. And trust me, it was a pain. But it was a cool place to be. And we were all looked at. So the other thing to keep note of is you cannot have a culture of innovation if you create an island outside the mainland. It will never work. You become the enemy very quickly if you don't work with the rest because the intent is not to build dependency on this little island. The intent of, and I keep telling my guys, every time I talk to them, and some of them are probably listening right now as well. The intent is not to create a dependency on my team. The intent is of this team to change and show people and take them on a journey and make sure all of us are out of our jobs. So it's a sustainable culture that we create so we can do other things. And that's very, very critical. There are many banks and other bank-like entities that have created these pockets of island. And you can see the frustration in the rest of the organization. They hate them with a passion because they're seen as the poster child. They get all the sexy stuff. They get all the ping pong, all that stuff, right? But they seem like they are privileged, which is not the intent. So how do you make sure that all the bits work right? Only then you can actually see the right change in the organization.
I think those are some great points, right? And particularly with the poster child and hating with a passion, I think a lot of times, not naming banks, but we've interacted with some foreign banks, and the chief innovation officer is not exactly everyone's favorite because he's getting all the media attention. Other people are doing the work, but
yeah,
that's a very good point. So before we move on to final thoughts, Datuk Nora, do you have anything to add to this topic?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. No, I just want to underscore what Shailesh said. It's a bitter lesson learned. Also for some of our leaders, okay, who were adamant about the rest of you just focus on BAU. Let the sexy stuff be taken care of by this group of sexy people. Very quickly, the people we hired, who were perfect, they were wonderful, they were the right talents. I noticed Shailesh giving a smile when you talk about right, and I'm totally with you. Okay, but after a year, they all left. Yeah, because it's really, really hard to try to create something outside and then try to bring it into mainstream. And I've never been a fan of that because we were twice burnt, because many years ago, we also had within our tech unit, right, the keeping the lights on group and then the sexy group, right? That was a surefire recipe for war, if you like, right? So yes, that is a very, very important lesson. I think that others should not have to go through. Start from that. I think the other aspect that I wanted to also underscore, or rather, highlight is I'm also in the same place with Shailesh, where the demand from the top is good. And so, that there isn't that need to sell so much, upwards. And the other I want to underscore is, yes, when I talked about ring fencing just now, it is about that. It's not just the leader at the top, trying to direct and do things from the top. You would actually have to go down to the ground. Because, like I said, the clearing of the path, that's what I meant by clearing of the path. You have to be down there. To be there and remove the obstacles, and with that, the confidence of the people around is built, and only then can you move on and try to tackle other islands. And when I talked about the islands just now, I'm talking about islands within the mainstream rather than outside the mainstream. Yeah, thanks, Vincent.
So the zest has to be within the same alignment as well. So other than that, Dr. Nora, do you have any other final thoughts or final advice that you want to share with our audience before we leave for the day?
Well, I suppose the only thing is to repeat my earlier point about this is the time for rebuilding better. And again, it's not just a trendy phrase, okay? Please don't let the crisis go to waste. We now have not just ourselves who's supposed to be more digital in our behaviors and in our expectations, but if our ecosystem is too. So whatever premise we had pre-COVID is no longer holds true. So if we are still using that, then we've not progressed as well. And this is important because it's for the benefit of a sustainable future for everybody, for society, for the ecosystem. And that includes looking for new models of operating. And with that comes the new tasks and the new roles that we've talked about that humans are supposed to have with everything digitalized, and everything we should automate, right? But that does not mean it's at the expense of the livelihoods of people. It will look different, and so be more open to the new solutions. And these are things that, for me, leaders, we need to think about this on a daily basis and look for solutions on a daily basis.
Thank you, Dr. Nora. So I think another thing to add to the final thoughts for the rest of the panelists is that, Dr. Nora spoke a little bit about the lessons learned from failure, right? And a lot of times we say whenever we innovate, we need to learn from our failures. And I think it would be interesting to hear from the panelists their final thoughts and some of the failures that they've learned from in the past that contributed to the whole innovation journey. Maybe we can go with Rajate, then Riddhi, and then Shailesh finally for the closing thought. Rajate, your views?
I think for me, initially was before, maybe a decade ago, was the failure to communicate with the customers. So we would do product pushing. And at that time, the word kind of UI, UX didn't exist in banks about a decade ago. Well, we knew what it was, but we kind of like, we weren't driven by it. We were still driven by drafting products, and we were pushing products. So this was actually back 10 years ago. I was actually in Leong, and we built something. And after we built something, and you have what you call after that your post-implementation review, and then I think no one actually used it, couldn't quite sell it. And then we set up this customer immersion forum, and guess what happened? The product, after we got 20 people, 20 of our customers to comment, to test and all that, the product then looked 70% different than how we actually initially crafted it. That was a real wake-up call. This was, I don't know, 2011 or 2012. Like, you know what? We can't be building this stuff in isolation. And we really have to think like these other guys, this whole customer journey thing. We talk that most banks do this, okay? Many years ago, they would say, yeah, we think about customer first. But honestly, we don't really talk with the customers. We don't build something that they want. So in working from that perspective, then it was a lot more customer experience, user interface. Then the whole thing was pretty much a digital transformation, right? And the acquisition of customers that used to not, who previously weren't our customers, but with these new things that we could build, and then we realized that you could never know the pain points of a customer because you're not in that business. You cannot, as a person, know everything that you think your customer needs until you work with them. And that was when the whole digital transformation came to me. Of course, for me at that point in time, it was very challenging for me. I was in a Chinese bank running an Islamic franchise. At that point in time, it was so small, and everybody felt it was an incongruous thing, an Islamic franchise within a Chinese-owned bank. So we don't have a GLC parentage, nothing. So at the end of the day, it was all about service and what you could offer. So it bore out of. By the way, I was entirely an investment banker, corporate and Islamic banker, with zero understanding of digital banking at that point in time. It drove me towards my own journey towards a re-education, a huge re-education for me, because unlike Shailesh, I wasn't a remotely tech except that I'm quite a geek. I love all these things, I love gadgets and stuff. But it was to teach myself, and I had to go and learn. And the only way to learn was to hire people who knew things that I didn't know. So again, I also started hiring people who were not bankers, who were people from the telco industry, people from FMCG. I also hired people who were, I remember hiring somebody who was working in Burberry, because she went through the whole Burberry transformation, and about teaching how to go from being, brick and mortar to selling things online, and immersing in a community that was so foreign to me. I was talking to young guys and I was hiring young people. That was a bit of a humbling journey. And that whole journey brought me to a world of possibilities. And from there, this is what I do with my people too. I tell my guys, please go out and see what the world has to offer. Just because you've been doing this way for 10 years and is yielding good results doesn't mean it's going to be good for the next 10 years, right? So it is that whole, I would ask people on the floor here, I guess everyone's here are already a believer, but the constant re-education, the constant re-engineering, and you must allow your people to have access to that as well. Access to the world outside, our current world. I also made the mistake of initially thinking that building an island would have been great because everybody in this box cannot think out of the box. So I'm going to either burn the box down or build another box. So that's what I did. I hired completely a whole bunch of people who had nothing to do with banking. While they were so brilliant and they could, build rockets to go to space, they had no appreciation of risk, compliance, and they got so irritated after 2 weeks if we tell them, oh no, but you got to get CCO sign off, you need to get risk sign off. And they were like, if it's going to take me 6 months to roll out my product, I don't want to be here. Exactly what Datuk Nora said. So suddenly I had all this bunch of clever guys who are like, bye. And something simple like, I don't want to use your HP, IBM thing. I want to use Macs. We were not on Macs, stuff like that. It was little things like that felt that there was some incongruence. So that was a painful lesson for me. So what I've since done was I brought these guys, people, the psychologists, the FMCG guys, to work within my team, within my whole product sales team, so that there is some appreciation from the old guys, how these guys think, and how these guys can also appreciate the trust business that we can never compromise on. I think it's yielding results. It's getting there. At least, I'm seeing that we have new customers that we never used to have. I host a number of e-wallet providers in this country, and that itself to me is a major acquisition and a major mind shift for my guys, because I'm positioning ourselves as an infrastructure bank to these guys. What does that mean? What do you mean infra? Because banks used to put ourselves in the center of universe. Now I'm saying you're not the center of universe, you're just the infra behind the e-wallet guy. It's their customers, it's not yours. And quit talking about wanting to acquire everybody's customers. It doesn't matter, it belongs to someone else, right? So those mind shift and the immersion, exactly what Dr. Nora and Shailesh said, we kind of need to build within. It is a bit of an evolutionary process. Rather than putting a whole bunch of spacemen on a different, I truly believed in that. I said, I have this big cruise ship. Actually, I presented to Tan Sri Kwek Leng Chan before. I showed a picture of a big cruise ship. I said, I'm going to put all these young guys on this Explorer motorboats. That was my thinking 10 years ago. Didn't work. So bring them back onto the cruise ship. And then what we do is we're going to make this cruise ship go faster. We're going to make it sexier, and then we're going to go to places together, as opposed to sending out, what I call these explorer boats. So that's my journey. I hope you guys.
Thanks for. No, for sure. Thanks for sharing your journey with us. I think those are some good lessons to be learned. Now, I'm normally quite conscious on time, and I apologize that we've ran a little bit overboard today, but there's just so many captivating points that I didn't want to cut anyone short. But yes, let's move on to Riddhi. Riddhi, do you want to share with us your closing thoughts, some lessons, failure lessons that you've gone through in the past?
Yeah, I'll keep it very short. I think coming from a technology vendor, the background that I come from is also a very strong banking background, and I was always learned to sort of sell products this is a lending product, this is a cards product. What I really love about my current organization, and I'm not boasting, is that this is not a banking company. So Backbase is more of a technology company where we are focusing more on journeys, on what any customer would like to do. It need not be a banking customer, right? It could be, and that's where if you look at within Backbase, we have people coming in from very diverse backgrounds. People who have done marketing with companies like Adobe, people who have done work with companies like Grab, and that just adding on to what Rajat said, right? This is where the diversity comes in, where banking is the bedrock. We have bankers, we have ex-bankers in the company, but the real differentiation comes in terms of, are we thinking end to end about what a customer wants, starting from prospecting all the way down to servicing and cross-selling and upselling. And that is where the experience of the journeys that I'm talking about, the life cycle comes in more handy. And today, I think whenever I'm talking to a prospect, whenever I'm talking to a bank, my discussions are more oriented about, okay, this is what a customer journey would look like. And it could be for any product, for all you might say, compared to probably 3 years back, where I was just thinking about, okay, this is how a lending product should look like, or this is how a cards product should look like. And that is where I think banks are also focusing more and more on, in terms of focusing on customer journeys, customer life cycle. It could be any product, but again, the important point is, how do you engage these customers across their life cycle? So I think that's been my learning. And the more I talk to banks and bankers who are really innovating, the more I get to learn. So yeah, that's all that I wanted to add as a closing comment.
Thank you, Riddhi. Last but not least, Shailesh, your closing comment and maybe some lessons from failure that you've learned in the past.
So I think I'll just use an example to talk about. So I joined the bank after a telco, and I'm not a qualified banker, whatever that qualified means, right? But now I know enough to be dangerous. As in, I'm not an expert, but if you ask the right questions, you manage to make some progress. But from my observation, again, this is not just one bank, but generally, during my consulting days, during my Barclays days, and even now, despite everything we've talked about, there are still a lot of the product teams that will focus on the product. Because by definition they're called the product team, and I think that's an opportunity. And let me use an example to highlight the actual point. So if I take mortgage as an example, right? The customer doesn't care about a mortgage. The bank cares about a mortgage. The customer cares about getting the keys to their dream home as quickly as they can. The fact that they have to go through the pain of this and that, and every time you cross one stage of the journey, you discover, by the way, you have to do something else. By the way, you have to engage a lawyer. By the way, so there is no clarity of, in simple customer terms, what should I be doing if I need to get if I need to buy an apartment, if I need to buy a home, whatever, right? My objective is different. My objective is to get that, that little apartment on level so and so, blah, 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 because I love the house. My family would love it. We'll have a great life. That's my life moment. But as far as the bank is concerned, it doesn't matter which bank, a progressive bank, a innovative, it doesn't matter. It's all the same. They will be what they are measured on. And I think one of my panelists talked about KPIs and things. They are measured on how many mortgages you signed this month. Unfortunately, that's the measure. Right? And for the right reason. You've got to make money to pay the bill. All that stuff is fine. But it's how you do it and how you deliver the experience. Once you sign up for the mortgage, the only time I will call you is when you miss your payment. How terrible an experience is that? I will never, acknowledge, blah, blah. I will never say, do you need any home improvement? Do you need any? Nothing. You miss a payment, you will hear from me. And that's the difference between inside out, as in a bank thinking about a product centric, versus outside in, which is the customer thinking about getting a home. Mortgage just happens to be an inconvenience that he or she has to go through because he or she doesn't have enough money. And banks play a role to extend that in the time of need. But you could do it in a much, much pleasant way when it comes to experience. Going through the emotions or understanding the emotions the customer goes through, depending on type A, type B, type whatever those types are, that each bank would classify as a segment or a target, whatever each of them call. But that's the thing, right? So there are lots of learnings along the journeys. I know it's really too late, but one thing I did, which was customer immersion way back when, that was my first customer immersion session that I conducted, where we gave product teams and the product GMs mug shots of customers, real Barclays customers, real customers. We took them offside, we gave them mug shots, we put their age, and we said, what do you think is this customer's wants and needs, the life in this particular? And you will be surprised, 100% of them were wrong. 100%. Because of the biases that they have. Because after they created the profile, the persona, they said this is probably blah, 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 blah. We actually got the customer, the real one, and said, now you can talk to the guy, interview the guy and understand. 100% failed. So there is a lot to learn by walking in the customer's shoes, talking to real customers, understanding their day in the life of. And it's across the customer continuum, whether it's a sole prop, whether it's an individual customer, whether it's a corporate. They all have things that most banks don't understand. So it's important to walk the shoes and then come up with what makes sense to offer as an experience.
Thank you for that, Shailesh. And again, apologies to the panelists for running late and the rest of the audience. I hope you guys enjoyed the session. I really struggled to decide whether we should cut it off or not, because I think there's a lot of important points that were brought up, and I really didn't want to miss out on any of the points. But again, thank you for tuning in. Special thanks to the speakers for sharing their insights with us. And with that note, it's a perfect place for us to end this session today. Have a good evening, a good rest of the day, and stay safe out there. Thank you for tuning in, guys. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thanks for